So today we're going to talk about unit circle in trigonometry. So what is a unit circle? So unit circle is a circle with a radius of 1. And in trigonometry, the unit circle is centered at the origin. So origin is at 0, 0. So if you take a look, the distance of the radius is 1. So if the distance is 1, this coordinate right here on the x-axis is 1, 0. And then the opposite side on the x-axis is negative 1, 0. And if you look at the y-coordinate where it intersects, it's going to be 0, 1 and 0, negative 1. So the circle has a radius of 1. Now, I also want you to pay attention to the degree measure. This is the first quadrant, as you guys already know, and to go into the second quadrant, we go counterclockwise. The angle measures go the same way. So the 0 degrees happens right here on the x-axis on the first quadrant, and then this is going to be 90, 180, counterclockwise to 70, and back to 360. So let's say if you want to know where 150 degree would be, this will be 0, this is 90, 180 is here, so 150 degrees will be somewhere in the second quadrant, somewhere over here on the circle. So today we are going to talk about reference angles. So before we talk about reference angles, we're going to talk about unit circle in trigonometry. So if you take a look at this triangle that I drew, and I actually drew in another radius that is actually not on the axis. So this radius is actually any point on the circle in the first quadrant. So I just chose a random point that has of course it's going to have a radius of 1, and I label this as x since this is a horizontal distance. This is a vertical distance. I label y, which means that this coordinate is going to be something called x comma y. So today we are going to find and learn how to find these coordinates that we are unable to identify. So here we know that this is 1, 0. Here we know that it's 0, 1. But what about these coordinates in between? So we have this angle theta, and this is the reference angle. And we know that if this is theta, we know that this is opposite, the x is adjacent, and 1 would be the hypotenuse. So let's write the trig ratio using sine and cosine and write it in terms of x and y. So cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so x is the adjacent, 1 is the hypotenuse, so cosine of theta would be x over 1. Same thing for the sine, it's opposite of hypotenuse, so it will be y over 1. So x over 1 is equivalent to x, so we can say that cosine of whatever this angle is going to be the x coordinate, and sine of whatever angle this is going to be the y coordinate. So this coordinate right here is going to be cosine of theta comma sine of theta. So this verifies that x comma y equals cosine of theta comma sine of theta. So cosine is the x coordinate and sine is the y coordinate. This is very important. So let's look at the quadrants. Looking at the quadrant, we know that in the first quadrant, cosine and sine is both going to be positive. Somewhere in between the range of 0 to 90 degrees, the coordinates of x and y are both positive. What about the second coordinate? Second coordinate, we know that the x is negative, so in this case, the cosine is going to be a negative value. In the third quadrant, both x and y are negative, so cosine and sine are both going to be negative values. And in the fourth quadrant, we know that only the x value is positive, so the cosine is going to be positive and the sine is going to be negative. I will copy this note down because this is very important. So how do we figure out angle measures using reference angles? So let's talk about standard position of the angle. So when we talk about standard position, we talk about initial side and the terminal side. So initial side is basically where the angle starts from, and the terminal side is the side where the angle ends. So there are 4 quadrants in this diagram. So let's talk about the reference angle in all 4 quadrants. In quadrant 1, the angle measure is going to be in between 0 and 90. So whatever that angle measure would be from 0 to 90, that it would be the angle on its own. So if you notice over here, I gave you guys a 60-degree angle. If it was a 30-degree angle, then 30-degree would be the reference angle. If it was a 45-degree angle, it would be 45 would be the reference angle. So if it's an angle measure that's between 0 and 90, it's pretty simple. That angle is the reference angle. Now, what about the other quadrants? The other quadrants is the ones that we need to focus on. So in the second quadrant will be a range of angle measures that is between 90 and 180. So 120 would be a measure that would be a good example for a second quadrant. So in second quadrant, even though it's 120, the reference angle is 60 degrees. Why? How many more degrees do we need to go to make 180? So 60 degrees will be the reference angle if the angle measure is 120. Third quadrant, let's say the angle measure is 240. 240 is an example because it's the angle measure that's in between 180 and 270. Now, even if I gave you the 240 degrees, 240 degrees will not be the reference angle. 60 will be the reference angle. Why? To find the 60-degree angle, you subtract 180 degrees from 240 to get the reference angle 60. I'll show you each case in the next slide. What about the fourth quadrant? Fourth quadrant would be an angle measure between 270 and 360. So 315 would be a good example. 315 will be somewhere over here. So how many more degrees do we have to go to make a full 360? It would be 45. So 45 would be the reference angle. So how do we find the reference angle in the second quadrant, third quadrant, and fourth quadrant? I'm going to show you how to find the specific reference angle and also how to draw the diagram. So 150, if you guys see, that's going to be in quadrant 2. Why? Because we know that it is going to be between 90 degrees and 180 degrees. So if it's 150, then it's going to be somewhere over here. So this is going to be the initial side, and then the terminal side will go somewhere over here. So you're going to draw in a right triangle where one of the legs is going to be bounded by the x-axis. Actually, the third quadrant and fourth quadrant is going to be looking the same. One of the legs of the right triangle is always going to be bounded by the x-axis. So if this angle, let's say theta, that they give you is 150 degrees, then to find the reference angle in this case, you're going to find, let's say, the reference angle R, let's say. So R is going to be the reference angle. To find the reference angle, you do 180 minus theta will give you the reference angle. So if you plug in 150, 180 minus 150 is going to give you 30. So 30 degrees will be our reference angle for 150. So what about 210? So in the third quadrant. So let's quickly look at the third quadrant. So third quadrant, again, I'm going to draw the coordinate axis. Third quadrant is going to go somewhere over here. So you're going to draw in, this is the initial, the terminal side is going to look something like that. So if this is the terminal side, you're going to draw in a height. That is where one of the legs is going to be bounded by the x-axis. I'm going to just erase this piece, but I can draw it back. So it's going to look something like this. So this is going to be 210 degrees. Now, how are we going to find the reference angle that is right here, right over there? So in this case, we know that you're going a little more from this 180 degrees because it's going to be between 180 and 270. So this angle, to figure out this reference angle in the third quadrant, you actually do the reference angle formula basically would be theta, right? Theta meaning the angle that's given, the third quadrant, minus 180. So this will be the kind of like a formula for the third quadrant. So you do 210 minus 180 is going to give you 30. So this is also going to be 30 degrees. So that's going to be the reference angle. So lastly, let's take a look at the fourth quadrant. So they gave you the measure 300 degrees, and you know that it's going to be in the fourth quadrant because it's going to be between 270 degrees and 360. So we know that initial side, terminal side is probably going to end somewhere there. So if you draw in the terminal side, it's going to look like that. So you're going to draw a triangle bounded by the x-axis. So if this is 300 degrees, how many more degrees are you going to go to get to 360? So this is going to be the reference angle R, let's say. So what would be the formula to find the reference angle in the fourth quadrant? So it's going to be 360 minus theta. If this was theta, that would be 360 minus 300, which is going to give us 60. So this angle right here, this reference angle, is going to be 60 degrees.